The billionaire's eyes narrowed as he prepared to humiliate the exhausted waitress in front of Chicago's most powerful elite. He ordered his wine in a dead language, a linguistic trap designed to destroy her. But what he didn't know was that the woman holding his menu had once been one of 3 scholars in the entire world chosen to decode that exact dialect. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it ended his empire. The question everyone asks after hearing this story is simple. How does someone go from serving tables to directing a multi-million-dollar research institute in less than 6 months? But that's the wrong question. The real question is this: what happens when the powerful mistake invisibility for incompetence? To understand the answer, you need to know what was happening in the golden room of the Beaumont Club on that freezing January night. You need to understand who Maya Chen was before she became invisible. And you need to witness the exact moment when a dead language became the most powerful weapon in the room. Maya's feet were screaming. 16 hours, that's how long she'd been moving through the Beaumont Club's dining room, a space where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. The cardboard insole in her left shoe had disintegrated around hour 12, and now every step sent a jolt of pain up her spine. But she didn't limp, couldn't afford to. The guests at the Beaumont Club didn't pay $2,500 per person to watch the help suffer. They paid to exist in a world where suffering was invisible, where their luxury was served by ghosts who materialized only when needed and vanished the moment their use expired. Maya had become very good at being a ghost. Table 12, now. Dominic Pierce, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow like a shark scenting blood. His voice was barely a whisper, but Maya heard the edge in it. Fear. Marcus Whitmore just sat down. Everything perfect. Everything. Maya's stomach dropped. She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Marcus Whitmore, tech mogul, $4 billion, featured on the cover of Fortune magazine under the headline, "The Man Who Sees Around Corners." Known in the industry for 2 things, predicting market crashes with supernatural accuracy and destroying anyone who challenged him with surgical precision. "I need you invisible but impeccable," Dominic continued, his fingers drumming against his tablet. "These people can end careers with 1 phone call. Do you understand?" Maya nodded. She understood perfectly. What Dominic didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that 18 months ago, Maya Chen had been sitting in the library at Cambridge University, her dissertation spread across a mahogany table, when her phone rang with the news that would shatter everything. Her mother. Stroke. Intensive care. The medical bills started at $14,000. They didn't stop. The Pemberton Fellowship, one of 3 awarded globally each year, full scholarship, housing stipend, the academic opportunity of a lifetime, became a piece of paper in a drawer. Cambridge became a memory. Dr. Maya Chen, future expert in linguistic erosion and colonial power dynamics, became Maya the Waitress. The brilliant scholar who could decode 12 dead languages became invisible in a white shirt and black slacks, carrying overpriced food to people who never looked at her face. Marcus Whitmore occupied space like a predator. He was 47, sharp-featured, with the kind of calculated handsomeness that came from personal trainers and dermatologists. But it was his eyes that made Maya's skin crawl, the way they cataloged everything, assessing value and dismissing what didn't measure up. His companion, Isabel, was elegant in the way that money makes effortless. Diamonds at her throat, silk dress that probably cost more than Maya's car. But there was something in her posture, a tension, a wariness that suggested she knew exactly what kind of man she was sitting across from. The third person at the table was younger, maybe 30, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his nervous energy. Cameron, Marcus's newest associate, judging by the way he kept glancing at his boss like a student waiting for approval. Maya approached with water glasses, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. Good evening. I'm Maya, and We'll start with the Chateau Margaux, Marcus interrupted without looking up from his phone. The 2015. Cameron, you're having the ribeye. Isabel will have the halibut. Isabel's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Maya wrote it down. Of course, sir. And for yourself? Marcus finally looked at her. Really looked. His gaze traveled from her name tag to her face to her worn shoes, and something like amusement flickered in his expression.
Actually, he said, setting down his phone with deliberate slowness,
I'll have the wine list. I'd like to make my own selection. The table went quiet. Isabel's eyes closed briefly. Cameron shifted in his seat. Maya felt it then, the shift in the air, the sense that something was coming. She'd seen this before, this particular brand of casual cruelty that the very wealthy sometimes practiced on service workers. The need to assert dominance, to remind everyone in the room of the hierarchy. She retrieved the wine list, presented it with both hands. Marcus barely glanced at it before closing it with a sharp snap. And then he spoke in a language that had been dead for 800 years. Non volez pas vostre conseil, serventa. Portats mezzo que vos demandi en la lenga dels señors. Old Occitan, the troubadour dialect from 12th century Languedoc, a language systematically erased during the Albigensian Crusade when the French monarchy decided that linguistic diversity was a threat to centralized power. The translation? I don't want your counsel, servant. Bring me what I command in the language of lords. Here's what you need to understand about what Marcus Whitmore just did. He didn't choose Old Occitan randomly. He chose it because he'd spent 2 weeks learning a few phrases phonetically, specifically to humiliate service workers at expensive restaurants. It was a game he played. Find an obscure language, memorize 1 or 2 sentences, then watch people fumble and fail. He'd done it in Paris with medieval Latin, in Tokyo with classical Mongolian, in New York with ancient Aramaic. Every time, the same result: confusion, stammering, humiliation. And Marcus would sit back, satisfied, having reminded everyone present that knowledge was power, and he had more of both than anyone else in the room. But here's what Marcus Whitmore didn't know. For the first time in 18 months, Maya Chen felt something other than exhaustion. She felt rage. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculating kind that came from somewhere deep in her bones, from the part of herself she'd buried to survive. Because Maya Chen knew Old Occitan. She'd spent 8 months in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France decoding Trobarit's poetry, verses written by medieval women whose voices had nearly been erased from history. She'd published a paper on the dialect's systematic suppression that had won international recognition. The scholar insider, the one she'd locked away to serve overpriced steaks, suddenly roared back to life. Maya set down her notepad with deliberate precision. She met Marcus's eyes directly for the first time, and she responded in flawless Old Occitan, using the formal register reserved for addressing nobility. Seigneur, la lenga que parlatz era la dels poetas et dels troubadours, non dels tirans. Se la voletz parlar, parlatz-la amb reverencia. Sir, the language you speak was that of poets and troubadours, not tyrants. If you wish to speak it with reverence. The room went silent. Marcus's smirk vanished like smoke. Nearby tables stopped their conversations. A waiter froze mid-pour. Dominic's face went pale. Maya wasn't finished. She switched to modern French, her pronunciation precise and cutting. Your accent, by the way, is incorrect. You're using the northern Languedoc variant when the context of your sentence requires the southern Toulousan dialect. The vowel stress is completely wrong. Back to English now, her voice calm but carrying across the suddenly silent dining room. And since we're performing linguistic theater for the audience, let me provide some historical context. Old Occitan was the language of the troubadours, of courtly love poetry, of some of the most beautiful literature of the medieval period. It was spoken by nearly 2 million people across southern France. She paused, letting the room hang on her words. And then, in 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade. 20,000 people were massacred in the city of Béziers alone. The language was systematically suppressed, beaten out of children, erased from schools and churches. By 1350, it was effectively dead. Maya's eyes never left Marcus's face. So when you use a murdered language as a party trick to humiliate a waitress, you're not demonstrating your intelligence, Mr. Whitmore. You're demonstrating that you understand neither the language nor the violence that silenced it. She picked up the wine list and set it gently on the table. The Chateau Margaux 2015. Excellent choice. It pairs beautifully with humble pie. Maya turned and walked away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The meal passed in excruciating tension. Marcus Whitmore barely touched his $300 steak. He ordered again in clipped, modern French. No more games, no more showing off. His jaw was tight, his movements rigid. Cameron stared at his plate like it might provide escape. Isabel, on the other hand, made quiet conversation with Maya during service, her eyes warm with something that looked like gratitude. But Maya knew it wasn't over. Men like Marcus Whitmore didn't accept humiliation. They retaliated. The bill came, $1,847. Marcus paid with a black credit card without looking at it, his fingers drumming against the table. Maya processed the payment, returned the card and receipt with a professional smile. 5 minutes later, Marcus stood abruptly. "My card." His voice cut through the dining room's murmur. "Where is it?" Maya's blood went cold. "I'm sorry, sir?" "My credit card. I placed it on the table. Now it's gone." Every head in the restaurant turned. "Sir, I returned your card to you along with—" "Are you calling me a liar?" Marcus's voice rose, sharp and dangerous. "Check your pockets, now." Dominic materialized, his face stricken. Other diners were watching openly now. Some had their phones out. "There must be a misunderstanding," Dominic stammered. "Maya is one of our most trusted—" "I want the police called," Marcus said flatly. "This woman stole my credit card. I want her arrested." Maya felt the world tilting. This was it, the end of everything. A theft charge would destroy her, the background check for any future job, the legal fees, her mother's care. 18 months of grinding invisibility, and it would end like this, with a false accusation she couldn't disprove from a man with enough money to make any lie become truth. "I didn't take your card," she said quietly. "I returned it to you." "Then you won't mind if we search you?" "That won't be necessary." The voice came from the entrance to the dining room, calm, authoritative, with the kind of quiet power that didn't need to be loud. Catherine Beaumont was 63, silver-haired, and carried herself with the assurance of someone who'd built an empire and had nothing left to prove. She owned the Beaumont Club. She also owned Beaumont Strategic Holdings, a $12 billion private equity firm that had seeded half the successful startups in Chicago. She walked toward table 12 with unhurried grace. "Mr. Whitmore," she said pleasantly, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus turned to her, his expression shifting to something like respect. Money recognized money. "Ms. Beaumont, this waitress, check your jacket pocket." Silence. "I'm sorry?" "Your suit jacket," Catherine said, her voice still pleasant but carrying an edge now. "Check the inside pocket." Marcus hesitated, then, with visible irritation, he reached into his jacket. His hand stopped. Everyone in the room watched as he slowly withdrew his black credit card. The silence was absolute. "I believe," Catherine said quietly. You owe Ms. Chen an apology. Marcus's face flushed deep red. I must have... You accused her of theft, Catherine continued, her voice still calm but somehow filling the entire room. In front of witnesses. You demanded she be arrested. You were willing to destroy her life over your own mistake. She stepped closer, and though she was a full head shorter than Marcus, she suddenly seemed to tower over him. Apologize. Now. I apologize, Marcus managed, the words clearly choking him. To her, not to me. He turned to Maya, and for just a moment she saw something raw in his eyes. Humiliation, rage, the wounded pride of a man unaccustomed to being wrong. I apologize, he said again, barely audible. Catherine wasn't finished. Your firm uses Beaumont Strategic for your acquisitions. We currently manage $340 million in your holdings. We also hold the notes on your leveraged positions, approximately $18 million due quarterly. Marcus's face went white. I'm terminating our relationship, effective immediately. You have 30 days to find alternative financing for your positions, or we'll be forced to call in the debt. You can't. I can, and I am. The papers will be delivered Monday morning. Catherine turned to the room, her voice warming slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. Your meals this evening are complimentary, courtesy of the Beaumont Club. She looked back at Marcus. You need to leave now. Isabel stood first. She removed her engagement ring, a massive diamond that caught the light like a star, and placed it on the table without a word. Then she walked out, her head high. Cameron scrambled to follow Marcus, who stormed toward the exit, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. The room erupted in whispered conversation the moment the door closed behind them. Catherine turned to Maya. My office, please. 5 minutes. Catherine Beaumont's office looked like a scholar's study disguised as a corporate suite. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, packed with texts on linguistics, anthropology, history. A framed photograph showed a young woman in 1940s dress standing in front of a small house in what looked like southern France. My grandmother, Catherine said, following Maya's gaze. Marguerite Beaumont, née Marguerite Bonnet, from Toulouse. She spoke Occitan as her first language. Maya's breath caught. They beat it out of her in French schools, literally, hit her knuckles with a ruler every time she spoke her mother tongue. By the time she emigrated to America in 1946, she'd almost forgotten it entirely. Catherine gestured to a chair. Maya sat, her legs suddenly weak. She died when I was 22, but before she passed, she taught me 3 things. First, that language is power. Second, that silence is violence. And third, that wealth without purpose is just numbers in an account. She opened a folder on her desk. I know who you are, Maya Chen. Your dissertation on linguistic erasure and colonial power dynamics was brilliant. I endowed the Pemberton Fellowship you received. When I saw your name on an application to work here 6 months ago, I had to know why. Maya's eyes filled with tears. My mother, she had a stroke, the medical bills. I know. I tried to reach you when you withdrew from Cambridge. Lost track until I saw your application. Catherine slid the folder across the desk. 2 years ago, I established the Beaumont Institute for Endangered Languages. $2 million in annual funding, research facilities, archives. The goal is to document and preserve linguistic diversity before it disappears entirely. Maya opened the folder. Inside was an offer letter. I need a director who understands that this work isn't just academic, it's political. Someone who knows that when we let languages die, we're letting entire ways of seeing the world vanish. Someone who would defend the soul of a dead language in front of a room full of billionaires. The salary line read $195,000 annually, plus comprehensive benefits. Your mother's care would be fully covered through Beaumont Medical Center. They have a neurological rehabilitation program, experimental treatments, intensive therapy, everything she needs. Maya couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. You proved tonight that you're exactly who I've been looking for, Catherine said gently. You didn't just speak old Occitan. You honored it. You understood what it meant. That's not something you can teach. Why are you doing this? Because my grandmother died wishing she could remember the lullabies her mother sang to her. Because 20 languages go extinct every year, and with them go songs and stories and ways of understanding human existence that we'll never recover. And because you were brilliant enough to earn this opportunity, brave enough to seize it, and principled enough to risk everything to defend something most people have never heard of. Catherine smiled. Also, destroying Marcus Whitmore's financing was deeply satisfying. He's been a thorn in my side for years. You gave me the perfect excuse. 6 months later, Maya stood in the bright rehabilitation suite at Beaumont Medical Center, watching her mother complete a set of strengthening exercises. Linda Chen's left side was still weak, her speech sometimes slurred, but the improvement was undeniable. She could walk with a cane now, could hold a book, could smile at her daughter without the fog of pain that had haunted her eyes for so long. "Tell me about the conference," Linda said, settling into her chair. Maya pulled up a chair, her conference badge still around her neck. 800 people, linguists from 40 countries. I'm keynoting tomorrow, The Violence of Silence, How Language Death Reflects Power Structures. Your advisor from Cambridge is coming? Professor Morrison. She cried when I called her, said she'd known I'd find my way back. Linda reached for Maya's hand. I never wanted you to give up everything for me. Mama, I didn't give up anything. I just took a different path. Maya squeezed her mother's fingers gently. You taught me that dignity isn't something people give you, it's something you claim. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Whitmore Capital files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Maya dismissed it without reading the full article. Marcus Whitmore's empire was collapsing exactly as Catherine had predicted. Over-leveraged positions, lost financing, cascading failures. But that wasn't Maya's concern anymore. Her concern was the 17 endangered languages her team was documenting, the 3 doctoral students she was mentoring, the article she was publishing next month in Linguistic Anthropology Quarterly, the podcast she'd started about dying languages that had somehow gained 100,000 listeners. Through the window, the Chicago skyline glittered against a purple sunset. I have something to show you, Maya said, pulling out her tablet. Remember the Occitan lullaby we talked about?
The one Catherine's grandmother forgot?
She pulled up an audio file. I found it in an archive in Toulouse, a recording from 1938. She pressed play. An old woman's voice filled the room, singing in a language that had been dead for centuries, resurrected for just a moment. A grandmother's love, preserved in vowels and consonants, in a melody that had survived despite everything. Linda closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. And Maya Chen, who had been invisible for so long, finally saw herself clearly in the window's reflection. Not as she had been, not as she might have been, but as she was now. Whole. The last time anyone saw Marcus Whitmore, he was boarding a flight to the Cayman Islands, his fortune reduced to a fraction of what it had been, his reputation in ruins. Isabel went on to start a nonprofit supporting women leaving abusive relationships. Cameron became a whistleblower, testifying about Whitmore Capital's fraudulent practices. And Maya? Maya kept speaking, for the languages that had been silenced, for the voices that had been erased, for everyone who had ever been invisible. Because she'd learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a world that demands your silence is to find your voice and use it. A language dies every 40 days. By 2100, half of the world's 7,000 languages will be extinct. But as long as someone remembers, as long as someone speaks, as long as someone fights, they're not gone. For the voices we've lost, and those still fighting to be heard.